And welcome back to Just in Time for Wine. Welcome to episode 2.
Yeah, welcome.
It is so good to be back. It has been a week already.
I can't believe it's been a week, to be honest with you.
I know. Well, we're on our third week now,
Yeah.
I think, roughly.
Yeah.
Somewhere along them lines. And if you haven't guessed what our episode is going to be about today from our title, we are going to be talking about all the bright places.
I'm so ready.
I am so excited to get started on this one. It has been a long time coming. This has been one of my favourite books for the longest time. I've read this book at least 4 times.
See, I've read it once. It was good. I will get into it, but yeah, I think similarly to last time, we have kind of differing extents to which we liked it.
We'll get on to that.
Yeah.
So how's your week been? What have you been up to?
Do you know what? It's been really busy. Those of you in England will know that lockdown ended this week. We're actually recording this on Wednesday. Lockdown ended today, and I work in retail, so
That's rough.
it's been stressful. Today was interesting. I've been on furloughed anyway to get deliveries and stuff, so I've been working, but it's just having the customers back has been intense. What about you?
Well, I was going to say, what have they been like? What's the public been like being back in the shops?
I think a lot of people have been really like, it's really stressful, take your time, it's alright, but then you get the odd few that just don't have the best patience in the world. And obviously, I'm in my customer service zone, I'm fine, I can deal with it, but it is a bit irritating.
It's so stressful because at the end of the day, like, you're doing your absolute best, you're working at maximum capacity with, as many staff that's, physically safe. You know, mind your manners in the shops, people. Keep that in mind.
Please.
Especially, we all need a pay raise at this point, don't we?
Yeah, I think Christmas is stressful enough in retail, but just coming out of a lockdown into Christmas it's just another level. I've never seen it like it.
Has it been like this, well, obviously not lockdown, but last Christmas, was it as busy as this?
No, in the couple of days leading up to it was, but we've still got 3 weeks.
Oh gosh.
I'm stressed.
I can imagine. Well, I've had a bit of a weird week, really.
Oh.
I am back in isolation after receiving a positive COVID test.
Oh.
I've been completely asymptomatic. I am absolutely fine. I think I caught the worst of being tired, and that's as far as my symptoms. I am very, very lucky. I'm very fortunate.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'm okay, and hopefully my isolation ends soon. 6th of December, I'm officially a free woman.
Not long now.
Not long, 4 days. But yeah, I mean, another big point to discuss, I think, before we get started, a COVID vaccine has been permitted to be used in this country.
That's just incredible.
I am so excited for a bit of normality.
Yeah, me too.
Roll out next week, I think, is when we're planning to release it to NHS workers, including student nurses, and the elderly.
Including you then.
Including me, so
Woo!
a week after recovering from my COVID, I will be getting the vaccine. Talk about timing.
Yeah.
But yeah, very exciting. Do we reckon we will see the opening of the rest of entertainment after Christmas?
I don't think it'll be that soon, because in order for a load of people to have it and for that to be safe, it's going to take time. However, I think that slowly things will start to go back to normality. Well, I hope anyway.
Hopefully. I know we're in the tier system till February, and then it's going to be reviewed. I'm imagining it's been extended till February because the vaccine takes 4 weeks to fully protect you. It's you've got to have 2. There's 3 weeks in between the 2, and then 4 weeks after that until you're covered. So hopefully, February, March of 2021, the majority of the public should be covered. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
I mean, we all said 2020 will be our year, but let's just make it 2021.
Let's not jinx it before it's begun. Okay, so let's get started. I'd just like to identify a trigger warning before we start this episode. There's going to be intense discussion of mental illness and suicide. If this is something that you find may trigger you in any way, please click off the episode now. If you are suffering and you are struggling, please get into contact with mental health services, and if you are in any immediate danger, please call 999. And without further ado, let's get started.
So, all the bright places. We have Theodore Finch and Violet Markey. They're two teenagers who want to escape their small town. Violet's a popular girl who's secretly dealing with survivor's remorse, and Finch is a boy obsessed with death, labelled a freak by the other students. Fate brought the two together when they both climbed the bell tower at school at the same time, planning to jump off the ledge. Violet's been dealing with the death of her sister, Eleanor, who died 9 months previously in a car accident. Violet feels responsible and has not been in a car since. As for Finch, he suffers from depression and experiences near constant thoughts of suicide. On the ledge, Finch talks Violet down, and Violet returns the favour.
Finch initiates a partnership between himself and Violet for a school project in which they will explore their home state of Indiana together. The two begin a romantic relationship and fall in love. Eventually, Finch pushes Violet to get in the car for the first time after her sister's accident. He helps her begin to talk about her sister's death, which her parents have not managed to do. As a result, Violet begins to heal.
Finch, however, is getting worse. He suffers from an undiagnosed bipolar disorder and therefore deals with very high highs and very low lows. The one shining spot in his life is his blossoming relationship with Violet. The pair wander around Indiana together some more. However, on one occasion they accidentally stay out till the next morning, angering Violet's parents and forbidding their daughter from seeing Finch again. This begins a downward spiral for Finch, who ends up getting expelled from school. Finch is easily able to hide his worsening depression from Violet, who doesn't realise the seriousness of the situation and wonders if Finch is losing interest in her.
One particularly bad night, Finch decides to end his life. He takes a handful of sleeping pills, but almost immediately regrets it. He goes to the emergency room and gets his stomach pumped. After that, he tries to get help through a suicide support group in a nearby town. There, he runs into Amanda, another girl he knows from school. She's concerned about Finch's suicide attempt and tells Violet about it. Violet is obviously worried and tries to help. Finch explodes, angry at her concern, and the two get in a big fight.
Finch runs away from home, and Violet seems to be the only one looking for him. He sends her mysterious texts while he visits the remaining locations for their unfinished project, although Violet doesn't understand them.
A month after he has disappeared, Finch sends an email to every single person he knows, saying goodbye. Violet, in a panic, figures out that he has drowned himself at one of their wandering sites. She goes there and discovers she is right, and she becomes distraught. Later, she manages to decode the text Finch has sent her, and at the last location they were supposed to visit together, Finch wrote a song for her. This helps the healing process and convinces Violet that Finch's suicide was not her fault. The book closes with Violet going swimming by herself in the Blue Hole, while she went swimming with Finch, bringing her a sense of peace. Ooh! It's heavy stuff.
It is heavy, it's very intense.
It is one of those books, start to finish, where it's just everything. It's so intense from start to end, all the way through. So it's not an easy read. I'll give it its credit. It is one that commands the emotions, if you will.
Yeah, you're right.
Which I suppose brings us on to issue 1, which is how mental illness is portrayed and its treatment. I've just got a little bit of information from the World Health Organization site just to kick us off. Mental health is the foundation for the well-being and effective functioning of individuals. It is more than the absence of a mental disorder. It is the ability to think, learn and understand one's emotions and the reactions of others. Mental health is a state of balance both within and with the environment. Physical, psychological, social, cultural, spiritual and other interrelated factors participate in producing this balance. More than 100 million people suffer from mental health disorders in the Western Pacific region. Depressive disorders alone are responsible for 5.73% of the disease burden here. And that is a lot of people.
Yeah.
100 million people is so many, and for mental health to be as taboo as it is still in 2020, it almost brings the question of what can the media, what can we be doing better to better represent this and better portray this?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think although understanding mental health and kind of accepting that it's a thing and not just in your own head, it's come a long way in recent decades. However, I still don't think it's talked about enough. I still think it's quite taboo. If you talk about it, it's kind of, oh, you just want attention, and I don't think that's true at all.
No, definitely not. I think we've still got a very, very long way to go. I think the conversation isn't over yet. I think we're kind of reaching into new territory where we're now openly talking about different disorders that were never recognised as disorders before. Different things like addiction and eating disorders, and how all this links in. Especially the process of physical health affecting mental health, and vice versa. I think as far as 2020 goes, we're not quite where we need to be, but the conversation has been started.
Okay, so the first thing I will say about this book is that it does deal with mental illness well overall, in relation to Finch especially. He repeatedly disappears for days on end and has a lot of negative thoughts and emotions, and he often feels deeply alone. To those around him, Finch appears to be funny and cheerful, but this just masks his internal struggles. As a sufferer of mental illness myself, these are traits I can relate to, and I feel like they were portrayed well.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to agree with you there. I feel like both characters were well represented in the sense that they both have different mental disorders.
Yeah.
Both of which I feel were represented fairly accurately. And I mean, I feel as though mental health in a modern world was very well represented here. I think the way Finch dealt with his negative emotions was very accurate to how most people would deal with their negative emotions. I don't think there was anything toxic about it.
Yeah, I agree.
Violet seems to suffer from survivor's guilt, and her depression and anxiety manifested itself in a way that she felt like she had to isolate herself from society and her fear of cars. Which, I mean, I don't really know a lot about survivor's guilt. I have never had to experience that myself. But I'd say that considering everything she went through, that would be a fair assumption to say that she would have to go through something like that.
Yeah, and in my experience, as I said, I have suffered with some of the things discussed in the book, and I feel like it was represented almost perfectly. Those symptoms and those traits I have also shown, so I feel like that's a good representation.
Definitely. And you can head over to Mind, which is a mental health charity, to hear more about other people's experiences with mental health. Always good to stay up to date with knowledge. There are so many different types of mental illnesses out there, and being aware of some of the biggest ones can really help you understand a lot of people's day-to-day life.
Yeah, for sure. Check them out.
Yeah, definitely.
However, throughout the book it's clear that treatment of mental illness is shown in a negative light. For example, on multiple occasions, Finch describes his reluctance to take medication to help with his mental illness, and he doesn't have a positive attitude to support groups either. This is dangerous, as young, impressionable readers who may need these kind of treatments could then be led to feel the same, which clearly has significant harmful implications. What do you think?
I mean, I just want to play devil's advocate for a second. I think it is an important discussion to bring to the table that a professional's first line of treatment for mental health is medication. That's the first thing they always recommend is pills, medication, all that kind of stuff. And that's not right for everybody. I think Finch was maybe in his right to push back a little bit and go, actually, no, just because this works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for me. Do I agree that advocating this kind of behaviour where nothing is good enough is dangerous? Yeah, I kind of do. I think it could cause a lot of damage to people that have never experienced mental health before, or haven't really heard of it, and are just discovering it for the first time, to think that there's nothing out there that can help them, because there is plenty of things. But I do kind of agree that he has a right to have an opinion on what he could take as a treatment, whether that be medicinal or therapy-wise.
Yeah.
What would you agree?
I do agree with you. I just think it's difficult because he isn't even open to trying them. I think you're completely right in that medication doesn't work for everybody, and therapy might not work for everybody, and every single person is different. However, he hasn't tried them and he isn't open to trying them, which I think is quite damaging.
But then could you argue that that's just the mental health manifesting itself? Isn't that the point? He's so, with the bipolar, he's so flippant that, isn't that just part of the illness itself? Should that be excused, or should that be disclaimed at all?
I think if that is going to be a thing in the book, it definitely needs to be a disclaimer, because whether it's accurate or not, whether it's right or wrong, it's damaging for the audience. It's a young audience, it's a young adult book, and say you're 13 years old, you're suffering with depression, you're reading this book, you go to your doctor, they suggest medication, it's leading you to just say, no, I don't want that, and that's harmful. That is harmful.
But then are we assuming that the reader isn't capable thinking for themselves? I mean, you're completely right in saying impressionable minds and what kind of mindset that might give somebody, but we should also not presume that somebody has gone into reading this with already knowledge, or perhaps being on medication already themselves. I think it has a potential to change somebody's medication route. Imagine you taking antidepressants that aren't working, but you didn't realise that wasn't normal. You thought, oh, it just takes a bit longer than usual. But then actually this kind of brings to the table, well, actually there's more things that could try, and maybe go back to the doctor.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I think if you think about the audience and you think about the age, if you're suffering with it and you think that Finch is relatable and you can feel how he's feeling, do you not think that that's quite risky to suggest that? I think if they wanted to put that in, that's completely fine. However, I do think it's important to just make note of that and say that this can be risky, like in the form of a disclaimer.
Yeah, you're completely right. I do agree with you. I think if you're going to bring to the table negative mindsets to any kinds of treatment, it would need a disclaimer.
Yeah.
Because obviously a problem isn't a problem solved unless you have a solution.
Yeah.
And obviously we shouldn't be letting things fester, because it does no good for anybody.
Yeah.
Which I suppose brings me on to my next point, because it highlights the fact that some people are reluctant to try treatment. Their mental health kind of becomes their personality. Symptoms of anxiety can be misread as just bits of personality quirks, and I think the more we talk about it, the more research is done, the more we kind of realise, oh, that's maybe not so normal. But I suppose at that point it's already ingrained into your personality a little bit, so at that point are we too far gone? Is it something that is then a permanent attachment to your personality? I don't know. I mean, I think that's an interesting point to research. But I think it could perhaps give the problem of, if mental health becomes better because of an identified problem, does that then take away from their personality? And does that make somebody reluctant to try treatments, maybe? Because I think the whole point of the book is Finch is a really quirky character. He is really eccentric, which bipolar disorder can make you like that. A lot of successful businessmen and businesswomen sometimes have the bipolar disorder. I mean, Kanye West, for example. Kanye West is a known sufferer from bipolar disorder, and he's really successful.
Yeah.
He has, sold out world tours. He's got really successful music. He has a fashion line. So in terms of Finch, he has all these crazy ideas, and he dresses how he wants, and he's got all these personality traits. And could we argue that Finch isn't Finch without his disorder?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's tricky because... Yeah, I completely agree with you, because I think it is difficult. Sometimes your personality can become your mental illness and be reluctant to get better. That, again, it's, do I want to get better, because then I'm compromising this part of myself, and I think that's an important thing to consider.
Definitely. I'm not sure how much research has been done into that. That's a really interesting sociological, psychological take on it. But yeah, I do think... But then I suppose, if you think back to, I don't know, early 1900s, 1800s, we're going back a century or two, mental health wasn't really an identified thing. So was it just personality?
Yeah, so when you think back that far, I mean, even today in certain cultures, things that we would consider to be mental illness in other parts of the world are kind of normal and accepted. I mean, think about like Pika, for example, eating dirt and eating earth. If you did that in the UK, you would be seen as mentally ill, you would be seen as crazy. But in certain cultures in the world, that is not only acceptable, but that's normal.
That's true. And there are some really weird and wonderful things in other cultures where mental health is not seen as illness necessarily, but it's also seen as cultural, spiritual almost, which is really interesting. Definitely do some research into that, because I mean I could talk about it all day, but I'm going to get to your track. But yeah, I think. But then also, when we talk about mental illness, we don't talk about mental wellness. There's the other side to that conversation. What does wholeness look like? Can we achieve wholeness? Is it possible? Is mental illness actually like breaking your leg? It can be fixed and then you're okay. Or is it more just as we go through life, it's kind of roller coastering a little bit?
Yeah.
Is it something that's just going to stick around? I don't know. I think that's an interesting point to make.
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, I can't say for certain that you will never get better and you will never not suffer from it again. However, I can say for sure that for some people it does fluctuate for their entire life. They go through periods where they feel incredible, they feel on top of the world, and these periods can be years at a time, decades even, and it can take something simple to bring it crashing down again. And I think that's obviously not the case for everybody. Some people can recover and can feel better permanently, but you know, it's different for every person.
I think it was just interesting to bring up.
So, furthermore, we can't ignore that this book does glorify suicide. It makes it seem hauntingly beautiful. There will be people reading this who are contemplating taking their own life, thinking that people will finally care when they're gone, and this story seems to promote that kind of thinking, and that's really not okay. It's not okay to romanticise the notion that counsellors and peer groups can't be a place of support and help when having these kinds of thoughts, and it's not okay to suggest that suicide is a reasonable option, especially considering this is a book aimed at young adult readers.
I do agree with you wholeheartedly. However, at least the discussion is being made. Despite its glorification, it has started the important conversation of the prevalence of mental health in young adults and teenagers. You know, I think suicide has been so taboo for so long. At least somebody has come out and said it, and said, here it is. You know, it's not something to be ashamed of, it's not something to be scared of. It happens. Let's talk about it. Which is kind of what we're doing right now, where at least we're talking about it. Is it glorified? Yes, it is. Should all of them emotions be put onto another person? No. But yeah.
I just think, I get your point, I see where you're coming from. However, if this book was set on bringing that conversation to light and getting people talking about it, why did it do it in that way? Why, if that was intentional and that was a decision that was made, why is it done like this? Why has it not been done in a positive light? And I get for plot, it makes sense. However, if that was the intention of the author, why is it done like this? Do you get me?
Yeah, I totally get you. And if we discuss it just as part of plot, you know, I think it was so well written that it didn't just glorify it, but it kind of didn't turn it into a big disaster. Does that make sense? It didn't over exaggerate it. It was kind of, this is what it is, this is how we deal with it. It wasn't this big dramatic, you know, you watch him fall over the ledge kind of thing. It was somebody went through something really private and this is how people dealt with it afterwards, which I think was really good of the author to include. You know, this was a really private moment and it wasn't anything over explicit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do think you're right, but I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on this. In my opinion, it glorifies it and it romanticizes it, and I just don't think that's right.
I mean, just to add another point, it's highlighting mental health is just as prevalent in men than it is in women. I think in 2020 especially, something that has been brought up in the media almost constantly is how prevalent mental health is in men, just as it is in women. I think men are often encouraged to talk down about it. I think they're encouraged not to talk about it. I think emotions aren't encouraged enough. And I think a book that wasn't even written in 2020, I think this was written a couple of years ago now, had, you know, the balls to talk about something like this in young men and adult men and all in between. I think it did a really good job. It was almost ahead of its time in opening that discussion.
Yeah, I absolutely do agree with you on that. I think in this day and age, it's very much, oh, man up, you know, men don't cry, all of that, and it's like, that is, I'm sorry, that's utter crap. Like, I think you're right in that this book contributed to opening the door to talking about that, because men do cry and men do suffer with mental illness and men go through exactly the same things that women go through, and it's really important to talk about that. A lot of the time now you see in the media awareness for men's suicide and awareness for men's mental health, and I think that's so important because women, so if I had a conversation with someone about how I was feeling and I got upset and I cried, it would be, oh, it's okay, you know, I'm here for you. Whereas if a man did that, I mean, I've never been there because obviously I am a woman, but from what I can kind of see, it's like, oh, it'll be alright, mate, come on, move on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like man up.
Yeah.
Yes, which also kind of highlights the blatant sexism against men, just as it is in women. Which is quite dangerous thinking when you think about it. But yeah, I think the book was quite ahead of its time in opening the door for young men, adult men, to start talking about mental health.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will argue and say that the statistics don't support it. My only reply is, the statistics don't support the theory because men don't talk about it.
Yeah.
You can't record fake numbers just to make it look accurate. It has to be real recorded numbers. And if they're not coming forward and they're not seeking help, then, you know, of course the numbers are going to support that men don't suffer from mental health.
Yeah.
It's really important to reach out and to seek help. Whether you're man, woman, transgender, anything in between, really important just to seek out and get the help that you need.
Yeah. So when people say, well, the numbers don't support it, I think from a psychology perspective, it's really important to remember that quite often these things are self-report. So say you're looking at diagnoses from a doctor's office. Yes, the women's stats may be higher, but does that mean that it's not there for men? No, it just means that the men aren't going to their doctors and they aren't talking about it. Say you conduct a survey online and you ask men to talk about it, the stats for women will probably be higher. But again, it's not that men aren't struggling, it's that they're not coming forward with it. And self-report, if you approach a man directly and ask him about it, chances are you're just going to say they're fine. And that's the issue with these studies. They rely on self-report, and there is no other way to go about that. There is no other option really, but it's just important to bear that in mind. So yes, the stats do say that women suffer more with it, however, that's not representative.
Well, that could we have a psychologist in the room. Another important point I wanted to discuss before we move on to our next issue is that it is nobody's job to fix other people. I feel like as many good qualities that All the Bright Places has, it does insinuate that we have a responsibility to save each other, and that is not correct. That is not the impression anybody should be getting from this book. It places responsibility on already vulnerable people, which I think is really highly unfair. In Finch's and Violet's situation, Finch was leaving all these clues insinuating the end of his time, and it was Violet's responsibility to find that, and I think that puts a lot of responsibility on her, which wouldn't help her mental health. And it also gives a really dangerous idea to other people that suffer from mental health that they can be fixed by falling in love, and that is not the case. It's not somebody else's responsibility to fix things and make things magically better.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that if you're struggling, you are not, no one is entitled to your time and your help. You may want to help your friends, you may want to help your family, and that's a good thing to do. But if you feel like it's too much for you to do, you're not obligated to do that. The only person you need to focus on is yourself. And if you are able to help others, then of course that's incredible. That's a really good thing to do. But don't put yourself in danger for that.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Peer support is really important. Talking to your friends, talking to your family is really important. But again, it is nobody's job, other than a professional, to fix things, which I think is a really important point to make.
Yeah. Okay, so the second issue that we've identified in All the Right Places is reducing people to their illnesses. We kind of covered it before when we talk about it becoming people's personality, but in All the Bright Places, the characters become their illness. And while depression really can be all-consuming, I feel that a book about depression should show that there's more to it than their illness. It's full of thoughts of hopelessness, lack of belief in treatment, and a complete shortage of positive mindset when it comes to recovery.
And that's true. I feel like a good place to end the book would have been to follow Violet's recovery process, to give people a more accurate idea of what recovery looks like. I think, definitely adding on to what we said earlier about personality, I think late diagnosis of mental health, it kind of does become personality at that point, because you don't realise it's a problem, you think it's just you, which I kind of feel like this is what happened in this book. I feel like mental health was the personality, the person was the mental health. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, it's quite sad, really.
Yeah, and it makes me sad as well that these characters were defined by their mental state, and when you think about it, the adults didn't really care at all about what was going on with them.
I noticed that.
They kind of brushed it off. It's not a big deal, and I think, again, that's really harmful.
Definitely.
It makes people think, oh, well, if they're not going to care, like, why would I go to them? Why would I open up about it, you know?
That's true. I would definitely agree. I noticed that the only time the adults really cared were when the rules were broken.
Yeah.
That's when it mattered, which obviously, is not the best. But also, I mean, again, just to play devil's advocate, not everybody's parents are willing to have that discussion. A lot of the older generations are still very much in the area of, well, mental health is taboo, we don't really talk about it.
Yeah.
Would you say that's what happened in the book, or would you say that was writer's error?
I think I would probably argue that it was more writer's error / for the plot. I don't think it was intentionally... So I would argue that it was more for the plot. If Finch had really supportive family and they really looked out for him and they really wanted to push him to get help, would we have had the same plot? Would we have had the same story? I don't think so.
Definitely not. But then again, to argue, if it was done for plot, it kind of makes you question at the end of the book, could things have been done differently? And actually, yes, and I think this is very much a book of learning, about error and mistake and what could have been done differently. I think that shouldn't be retracted from possibly the bad plot making, because at the end of the book you kind of go, what could his parents have done differently? And I think a lot of people looking at this would also go, oh gosh, what could I have done differently if that were me? Which I think is a really important discussion to have. I think the older generation isn't as comfortable talking about mental health as I think, we are, as, people born in the really late 1990s and the really early 2000s. And, for generations to come, the children of today, the young teenagers that we've got today, what is their input, what are their beliefs? I think that'd be really interesting to look at. But just to placate from that, shall we have a look at some common myths about mental health and suicide, which I managed to gather from the Samaritans website. The first one is people who talk about suicide aren't serious and won't go through with it. Kat, what do you think about that one?
Oh, that kind of turned my stomach a bit, I won't lie to you. For sure, people don't always talk about it and they won't you won't know until it's too late. However, I think if someone raises a serious issue with you like this, if they tell you, I'm having some really dark thoughts, I'm thinking about ending my life, I don't feel like you can sit back and go, oh, they're not serious, it's fine. I really think it's important to take it seriously and see how you can help. I don't think for 1 second you should sit there and think, oh, it's okay, they won't do it.
Well, I really hope that that's everyone's mindset, because the fact is, people who kill themselves have often told people that life is no longer worth living already. They've already opened up. Some may use this discussion as a way of asking for help. Not a lot of people feel comfortable going, well, I kind of feel this way and this way and this way. Sometimes you've got to push to the extreme to get your message across, which is really sad in reality, but it's true. It's vitally important that somebody who expresses these ideas are taken seriously the first time, because as we know from psychology, and Kat, you'll be able to tell them a little bit more, about repetition and about, the mental process of having to constantly go around that repetition circle, and about long-term memory and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I just think if someone is at the point where they want to reach out, they want help, they feel like it's gone too far, this is probably going to be their final attempt at getting help, trying to save themselves. And I think if that's just brushed under the carpet, if it's ignored, look at what can happen. That's really, really important. And I think, as I said before, you cannot just ignore that. I think
it'd be really irresponsible.
They're not serious, they won't do it. Oh, 100%.
I think all the Bright Places really did represent that. It really did say, look what happens when you don't take people seriously. Look what happens when you ignore all the signs. Finch got expelled from school because of reckless behaviour that came from his mental illness. People didn't see him and look at him seriously and go, wow, this poor boy is going through something. Like, what could we do to help? And in fact, it just made it worse. It kind of drove him over the edge.
I think 100%.
I think at this point, if somebody's now opening up about life no longer being worth living, you've already missed all the other signs of them being at that point. A lot of people will make smaller hints as to not being okay before they get to that point, which I think is due to education. I think as a society we need to be more educated on spotting the signs before it gets to this point. Because again, it puts responsibility back on whoever they've opened up to. That is a lot of responsibility to hold, and I suppose you never quite know what's going through somebody's mind. You don't know if they're just saying it for help, which is fine, or if they're saying it because they've actually got a plan ready. But it's a really complex issue.
Yeah, and I think, say they are saying it for help, say they're not sure if they're going to go through with it, they just want help with what they're struggling with, you can still help with that. Like, just because you don't think they're serious, just because you think they only want help, why would you not give that help, Is it worth the risk of, oh, well, I don't know if he's serious? Why would you take that risk when you can help, if you're in the right mindset to help, of course?
Exactly. Which I suppose takes us on to myth 2.
So, myth 2 is, if a person is serious about killing themselves, then there's nothing that can be done. What do you think, Holly?
Well, this is so incorrect. More often than not, feeling suicidal is often temporary, which is why getting help at the right time is so important. As many people will know, as you go through life, it's very up and down. When you are at rock bottom, who's to say that you can't come back up? As the popular saying goes, when you've hit rock bottom, the only place you can go is up. Yeah. So often this feeling is temporary. Sometimes it's overwhelming, which is why people often choose to take their own life. But if given the right help and if given the right support, they can't fall any further than rock bottom. It's got to come up. What goes up has to come down, and what goes down has to come up. So yeah, I think that there is a lot that can be done before somebody has to get to their breaking point.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there are a million things that can be done, and it just comes back to getting them that help that they need.
It's about identifying it.
Yeah, for sure. And it can be tricky when you're trying to get someone that help and they either won't accept the help or are adamant they don't need the help. However, if they voice to you that they need help, you know, that chances are they want help, you know?
I mean, just to play neutral, to play Switzerland, if you will, what would you say then to the people that say, well, you can't help somebody who isn't willing to help themselves?
That's a tricky one. I think to a certain extent, yes, because you can put all these things in place, and if someone isn't listening to them and someone isn't even open to the idea of them, then yeah, but you still need to try. You still need to try and help that person, you know?
No, I definitely agree. I just thought it was interesting to bring up because, you know, you can't... I mean, without getting into the complexities of sectioning and depriving people of their liberties and their rights when, you know, their mental health doesn't allow for full capacity, you can't force feed people treatment.
No.
Which, just to clarify, if you've never heard of a sectioning, it's where the authorities are able to restrict you of your rights to be able to help you, which is a really complex issue. It's got to be done with at least 3 healthcare professionals and witnesses, and it's a whole fiasco. And there are so many parts to sectioning. You know, the police can do it. Obviously, it can be done through healthcare professionals. It can be done through committees. It's really complicated without getting too much into it. But yeah, I mean, just to throw it out there about depriving people of their liberties during mental health, what are your thoughts on that for somebody that doesn't really have any medical background? What do you think about that?
So I think it's tricky. It's basically a debate of giving people what they want and letting them make their own decisions and letting them have free will versus helping them with what you think is best when they're not in their right mind. I think if someone is suffering to that point where it's tunnel vision, it's I want my life to be over, there's nothing left for me here, that's a very consuming place to be, and there is no other thought. So I think it's tricky because every person has a right to make their own decisions, but then when they're in that state of mind, it's not really a decision because there is no other option. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, it's an evaluating process because capacity changes all the time. So it's evaluated at every stage. I don't know, I think it's a good ethics question because what gives us the right to deprive somebody of that? But then when they're not in the right mindset, you know, it's not safe, is it?
So I guess that brings us on to issue number 3 that we identified, which is dealing with grief. So with the death of Violet's sister, grief is portrayed well. It's shown as a long, painful process that can be debilitating and impact every aspect of a person's life. Violet becomes a shell of a person she once was, alienating herself and doing her best to stay under the radar. She struggles to talk about her grief, even with those closest to her, and I think although every person experiences grief differently, for some that is a realistic representation. For some, it is a super long process, it's painful, it hurts, they don't want to talk about it. For others, it might be the complete opposite. They might want to talk about it, they might want to get it off their chest, but I think from my experiences with grief, I would say that's a pretty realistic representation.
I would agree. I think it's a realistic view of grief. Grief, as many people know, has many stages, all of which I'd say are well represented in all the bright places. You know, you've got anger, denial, the sadness. Could you argue grief in itself is a mental illness? Because, I mean, it's something we all go through inevitably. Is that something to be treated like a mental illness, or is it just a process of life? I don't know. So Violet becomes self-isolated by her illness, which I feel as though many people also go through. I think it has the ability to help people realise that they aren't alone. I think the book did a really good job of that. Yeah,
so I think in the book, it obviously gives you the 2 perspectives. Violet is feeling isolated, she's feeling alone, and Finch is trying to help her with that. He's trying to reach out to her, even if she doesn't realise it. And I think it gives the reader that sense of another person's perspective. So in their own head, they might think, I'm alone, I'm isolated, I have nobody, and people might be trying to make that effort, and I think it brings that to light.
Excuse me. Yeah, I agree. I think it really puts a spotlight on, you know, how lonely and isolating all this is.
Yeah.
Especially grief. Grief can be such an isolating process, especially if you've never gone through it. I mean, obviously Violet had been through grief before, so this wasn't an entirely new concept for her, but the way she dealt with it was very, very different, which I will talk about a little bit more later on. But yeah, I think it was really important that they realised that they weren't alone and that there were people that they could reach out to.
Yeah, and I think another important point from my own point of view and from my own experience is that it kind of gets to a point, a certain time afterwards, where you feel silly for still talking about it and you feel ridiculous for still being upset by these things. And for me, I know that I kind of didn't want to talk about it anymore because I felt like I was bothering people and they wouldn't want to talk about it anymore. And I feel like this book shows you that that isn't the case. Like, you may think that people are over it, people don't want to talk about it anymore, but there are people that are there for you.
I totally agree. I mean, it's not... Grief can be a lifelong process. I think that's a really important bit to highlight. It's not something that ever goes away. It's something you will deal with for the rest of your life, as every person, you know, that lives and breathes will. I think it was really important that, you know, you shouldn't ever feel silly for opening up and for talking about things, even years down the line, because it can affect people that long. And I think that's really, really normal, and it was kind of nice this way.
Yeah, I think it doesn't just get to 6 months on and that's it, I'm over it. You know what I mean? There's no time grief. It doesn't get to a point where, okay, it's not acceptable to talk about this anymore. And I think it's All the Right Places does a good point, does well in highlighting that.
Definitely.
So, talking about grief again, with Finch's death, Violet copes better than she did after her sister died. She's still sad, but because of the help Finch gave her to help grieve for her sister, she knows that life must go on, and she doesn't repeat the same hopeless grieving process she went through before.
And I think that's one of the most important teaching points in the book, is that how we reflect and learn from past experiences. You know, you learn from past experiences, it's how we grow, it's how we develop. Violet has shown that development, which I think is really, really important, to show that just because you dealt with it the first time doesn't mean that you'll deal with it the same the second time. Everything changes, which I think is really important. And I think one of the biggest focal points of the book is that Finch takes Violet on this big adventure, teaching her different things, which once she opens her mind to new possibilities and adventures, she can begin healing. And I think that's where the healing process for her really started.
Yeah, and I think it's really nice in the book because they physically go on an adventure, you know, they explore their state, they go wandering, but metaphorically, that's a metaphor. Finch is helping Violet, he's taking her on this journey to help her grieve and to help her get better.
And especially when you look about, I mean, we'll talk about metaphors in general, you know, Indiana in the book is described as somewhere not very exciting. There's nothing really there. But actually, when you're in the right mindset and with the right person, it can be the best place in the world. You know, all these things can be so exciting. And one moment that really does stick out to me is when they go and see the man who had the home-built roller coaster.
That is exactly what I was thinking.
Right? And that's such a heartwarming moment because it's the little things, it is the little details in life, in places, that really makes all the difference.
Yeah.
And for that to stick out, I mean, to both of us, it made a significant impact on us the same way they did the characters, which I think was very well written and very cleverly thought out.
Yeah, I agree. I think being with the right person can make it. So, say you went to that little roller coaster site by yourself, you'd probably stand there and go, okay, cool, and then that's it. But in the book, it's a whole adventure. They have a whale of a time. They love it because they have each other there to experience with. They bounce off each other, and I think that's incredible.
I think it's really important that was highlighted. But yeah.
So, with grief, based on the research I've done, the general consensus is that the representation of survivor's guilt that Violet experiences is pretty accurate. It's not something that I've experienced, so I can't give my opinion, but based on what others have said and based on the research that I've done, it's portrayed well.
I think survivor's guilt is such a difficult one because it's so personal. I mean, everybody experiences it differently, as you do with anything. But that is something really specific to individuals. And I don't think it's talked about enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really mentioned, you don't ever really hear it. Which, kind of doesn't make sense in the context of what we're living in, especially with COVID going around at the minute. Survivor's guilt, I'm assuming, would be quite prominent at the minute. Not in such a dramatic way, but I'm imagining it does exist in survivors, especially being in, you know, such tight environments where death at the minute is so in the news, it's so talked about. We're not really talking about, you know, the people that lived and the impact on them.
I think that's a really important point. You cannot turn on the news without seeing something about COVID and the death toll and the R rate, and I think it's really important that All the Bright Places mentions survivor's guilt and brings it up and kind of brings it to the forefront, because as Holly said, I've not really heard much about it before, or I've not seen it represented in the news or in the media or in films or books, so I think it's really good that it's brought up in All the Bright Places.
It's really surprising how much of a lack of education there is about these things, about these topics that are really serious and affect a lot of people. I think that we should be beginning that conversation with our educators and our representatives and saying, these things exist, why aren't we talking about them?
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Why is there such a block on opening up about these things? And not to be too political, but is it maybe due to some of the people that we have higher up? Maybe their age might be something.
Maybe.
We'll leave it at speculation, but that's my little piece on it.
Yeah.
And that was kind of all of the issues we wanted to go through. It's been really heavy so far. A lot of really heavy topics have been discussed.
Yeah.
We really hope you've made it through this far. But yeah, I think everything we talked about and we debated about was, I think, really important. We've kind of gone through the whole book, really.
Yeah, I agree.
Come on then, give me your overall review and thoughts.
Okay, so I did like All the Bright Places overall. It was well written, I thought the characters were well developed. I felt that I could relate to some of their struggles. I mean, I touched on it in the episode, but the complete lack of hope in the book is something that grated on me. I don't think it's responsible to portray such a bleak outlook on mental illness, especially to an audience as young as All the Bright Places is aimed at. I've mentioned it quite a few times, it's such a young audience, and I don't think it's a good idea to portray such hopelessness and such tunnel vision. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, just to put the question out there, if this was an adult book, would your opinion be different?
I think it would, because in psychology, it's been proven again and again and again about how leading these things can be on a young audience. The audience that All the Bright Places is aimed at is the most impressionable audience. So I think if it was an adult book, I probably would feel differently.
Oh, fair enough. Could you also argue that the complete lack of hope in the book is actually the representation of mental health itself?
No, I completely agree. I completely think that's right. But it goes back to what we said about having a disclaimer that isn't there.
That's true.
I think it's all well and good to say, this is what happened, this is the plot, but there is no, this is only a story, you know? And I know that it does happen in real life. Trust me, I know. I just think it's really important to say that this isn't the only outcome, you know?
Do you think if you had read this as a child, this would have impacted you in any different way than being almost blissfully ignorant?
I think it would have, to be quite honest with you. When I was the age that this book is aimed at, I was facing some of the struggles they were talking about, and I think had I read this, it probably wouldn't have pushed me right over the edge, but I do think it would have had an impact on me.
That's very interesting. I mean, I loved All the Bright Places. Like I said at the beginning, I've read this book about 4 times and will probably go on to read it another 4. It's incredibly well written, it's accurate, it follows 2 characters who are completely different but somehow managed to fit like jigsaw pieces, which I think is really nice because a lot of people don't predict 2 very different characters to get together, and it's quite nice when they do because they somehow complement their differences. Despite it being neither of their responsibilities to heal each other, it showed the importance of peer support in the recovery of mental health. It follows heartbreak when Finch can no longer continue his life, and it shows a healthy way of grieving this. I think the author was incredibly sensitive in writing about these issues, as well as providing the harsh reality I think society needed. I'm so glad it's begun to open the conversation. It's not only mental health generally, but men's mental health as well. I think it's about time the stigma's broken and we begin to open up about these things.
Yeah.
I think it was a very articulate piece, and I think it's important for the younger generation to read it, despite its grievances. I think it was very well written, and you know, it started the conversation that a lot of us weren't ready to have.
Yeah, I agree. I would recommend it. I do think it's a good book. I did enjoy it, but yeah, I can't ignore the issues that I've raised.
And that is the episode pretty wrapped up. I mean, to end things, I will repeat what I said in the beginning. If you are affected by any of the things we've talked about today and need to reach out, there are plenty of places where you can reach help. There is the Samaritans helpline on 116 123. They are a 24-hour service, and they will talk to you as long as you need. They provide counsellors all hours of the day. Please reach out. If phone anxiety is something you suffer with, I'm sure a lot of us get that. There is the Young Minds Crisis Messenger, which are anonymous texts, which are free for the majority of text providers. So text YM to 85258. And if you believe someone or yourself is in any immediate danger, please do not hesitate and ring 999.
Yeah, I think that's really important. These services are available, they are out there. If you need help, it's a great way to get help anonymously. If you feel like going to your friends or family is too much, you're not ready for that, there is still help available.
And a lot of it is anonymous. So, you know, even if you're not in immediate crises but need support with something, they are really good. They are really supportive. I do recommend them. And if, you know, you're not in crisis and you're just curious, there are, you know, it's a Google search away. There are so many people to talk to, so many websites to look at, so many amazing charities to support, Mind being one of them. Check them out, and you know, keep talking about the things that are hard and that are difficult, because that is how we learn and how we get somewhere as a society, and we keep moving forward.
Yeah, this is an open conversation, it's an open discussion, and I think it needs to stay that way.
I definitely agree. And that sums up our entire episode.
That's it.
We really hope you enjoyed. Stick around for the next one. It is coming next week. Are we giving hints, Kat?
It's a little bit different. If you listen to our last episode on 5 Feet Apart, it kind of tackles some of the same issues regarding mental health, not mental illness but physical illness. Next week is something very different. It's more in my area of expertise. I'm really excited.
I cannot wait. This is a book I read in 2 days.
Oh, wow.
I read it in 2 days. I could not put it down. So hopefully that is enough enticement to bring you back.
Yeah.
You know, make sure you stick around, you subscribe. We're on Spotify, we're now on YouTube. You know, our Instagram, our Twitter, our Facebook will all be linked. We're just a click away. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you for giving us your time.
And we will be giving updates throughout the week on our next episode coming. I'm going to be naughty and release a little spoiler. It is a book written by Steve Kavanagh. He is currently an Amazon bestseller.
Oh.
Yes, I said it.
The man is a genius.
Oh my gosh, I cannot wait to film the next episode. But that is us. Thank you so much for sticking around, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.